besides you interconnecting all the elements of, connecting capitalism, economics with individual liberty, one of the other things I found really fascinating about your writing, again, you talk a lot about cascading effects. Sometimes in the Army call them second to third order of effects. And when people realize that when these small businesses close down, or even when you send money to some of these institutions that don't need it, there are vendors, suppliers for some of these universities. They're towns which they lose small businesses. And one of the things that I never realized, you connected really some of the riots that we had, some of the upheavals that we had due to, for whatever reason, we saw riots, was in Michigan, or we saw riots many places, but just the destruction on the small businesses. I mean, it's almost like these small businesses were getting beat up in every single direction.
They were, and again, it goes back to the individual rights. And this is, the part that was, again, so frustrating, because we can't have a logical conversation, a nuanced conversation in this country. But the George Floyd protests and the Breonna Taylor protests and all of these protests were protests against the government infringing on individual rights. It's the same, we're fighting the same fight. And so to then say, well, they infringed on my rights, so now I'm going to go infringe on somebody else's rights and burn their down. It's like, but you're just taking away the point you're making. Like, we should all be standing together and making the same point. And that was like part of the tragedy that was lost in the discussion. And as I, relayed through some of the stories in the book, the most impacted communities from not only the COVID mandates, but then the double whammy of having this social justice fallout, which was, again, a protest against government infringement on rights, were these small, vulnerable communities and minority business owners. So people who, were feeling the issues and want to fight the issues were then personally experiencing additional loss. And I think there's such, again, a high level misunderstanding of not only property rights, but of business and private enterprise, and, kind of the whole dynamic of, who's big and who's small, and how that impacts the economy. So you say, well, it's okay, they've got insurance, they'll recover. And it's like, no, like, it morally is wrong. But a lot of these don't, or doesn't cover what you've done, or you've now like burned down their soul. Like, I don't think people could understand that it's, it's certainly different, but it's a really bad thing. And we should be looking at that in the same bad light. And then I cited those statistics, which I was thrilled I was able to find, about, cities recovering from episodes like riots, and how much faster they bounce back after like something like a hurricane versus something like a riot, because of the mental sort of defeatedness, if that's a word, mental defeats that you feel when somebody goes in and takes something from you versus just an act of nature that takes it from you. So it's just a very different reaction. And so, I was glad to be able to find some supporting statistics to kind of show the scope. And we're still seeing it. The minority business owners and the vulnerable communities are still the ones that are hurt the most and having the hardest time paying their rents, and, are in having vulnerabilities around staying open. So that's like not a good outcome if we're trying to achieve more equality and more opportunities for wealth creation for everybody in this country.
Oh, and the example, I forgot his name. I'm sorry. The poor fireman. Oh my God.
Bala. Oh my God. I mean, the irony there was not lost on me.
Wow.
Yeah. Just to tell the story, since you brought it up really quickly, is this fireman who retires. He spends his whole life fighting fires. He spends his life savings and all this time, and he's about to open up his dream sort of restaurant and bar called Scores in Minneapolis, and he is pushed back on his opening. because of these COVID mandates, and like, okay, I'm gonna try and hang in there, I'm gonna get to open. And his place was burnt to the ground in the protest that happened around Lake Avenue during the George Floyd protests. And he was on the news in tears that like they like, even if they could replace, which fortunately he got a GoFundMe and he was able to replace the Capitol, but the time that he lost, the time away from his family, the blood, sweat, and tears it took to build this thing up and be ready to present to the world and have it taken away. And so this is this family of color that was like, yes, justice, but this isn't justice. Like this is a bad outcome. And so it's important to tell those stories and for people to understand the appreciation of why we need to really look at things based on principles and based on our individual rights.
If you like this content and want to hear other things like it, head on over to the website at blackmarketleadership.com. That's blackmarketleadership.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, and you can even create a free members profile